What happens when 5 drunk troublemakers mock a quiet elderly couple at the movies? They thought the old man was weak until he stood up. The skills he revealed that night, they weren't learned in retirement, but in decades of Marine Special Forces training. The Century Theater glowed against the darkening Friday sky, its vintage marquee advertising The Longest Day, a classic war film that had drawn a modest but appreciative audience. Inside, Sarah Mitchell adjusted her glasses, her silver hair neatly pinned back. At 65, the retired nurse carried herself with quiet dignity. Beside her sat James Mitchell, her husband of 40 years. At 68, James's weathered face told stories his lips rarely shared. The faded USMC pin on his worn leather jacket was the only visible hint of his 27 years as a Marine. The theater doors burst open 20 minutes into the film. Laughter and the sharp smell of alcohol preceded a group of 5 young men who stumbled down the center aisle, phones glowing like fireflies in the darkness. Their voices carried with dialogue, disrupting the immersive beach landing scene playing on screen. "Dude, this is so ancient." One laughed, slouching into a seat directly behind the Mitchells. "My grandpa probably fought in this war." His friend snorted, kicking the back of Sarah's seat as he settled in. "Yeah, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth." Sarah winced but said nothing. James's eyes remained fixed on the screen, though the slight tightening around his jaw betrayed his awareness. The men continued their commentary, voices growing louder as they passed a concealed flash between them. When a particularly powerful scene fell silent on screen, Sarah finally turned. "Excuse me," she whispered. "Would you mind keeping it down just a bit? It's difficult to hear." The tallest one leaned forward, his breath hot against her neck. "Sorry, Grandma. Is your hearing aid not working?" His friend snickered. The theater manager, a thin man in his 30s, appeared at the end of the aisle but hesitated, assessing the situation before retreating. "Please," Sarah tried again. "Others are trying to watch." "Others?" The leader mimicked her tone. "You mean the retirement home field trip?" He stood suddenly, pretending to lose his balance, and sent Sarah's popcorn and soda splashing across her lap. She gasped at the cold liquid seeping through her clothes. "Oops," he said, not bothering to whisper anymore. "Guess your diaper catch that." Scattered, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the theater. James still hadn't moved, but his focus was no longer on the film. His eyes, sharp beneath gray brows, methodically tracked each member of the group, noting positions, build, and potential threats. An assessment as automatic as breathing. "Look at your husband," taunted the leader, noticing James's stillness. Too scared to say anything? Or just too old? Sarah dabbed at her wet clothes with a small packet of tissues, her hands trembling slightly. Around them, other patrons shifted uncomfortably, some turning to watch, others deliberately focusing on the screen. "Back in my day," one of the group continued, emboldened by the lack of resistance, "men actually stood up for their women." He reached over and flicked the USMC pin on James's jacket. "What's this? You buy that at a yard sale, old-timer." The theater had grown unnaturally quiet, the film's epic battle playing out in stark contrast to the tension in the aisle. A teenage girl several rows ahead turned and aimed her phone toward them, sensing the brewing confrontation. James finally looked up, his movement unhurried. He placed a steadying hand on Sarah's arm, a gentle pressure that carried decades of meaning between them. "Sarah, are you all right?" "I'm fine, James." Her voice was soft but steady. The leader leaned in closer, emboldened. "Oh, he speaks. What's wrong, Grandpa? Was that pin from some costume shop?" Another young man reached over and deliberately knocked James's drink from the armrest. "Oops, senior moment." An older man 2 rows ahead half rose from his seat, then hesitated and sat back down. A woman near the exit whispered something to her husband. No one intervened. "Maybe we should go," Sarah suggested quietly, sensing what was coming. James shook his head once, the movement barely perceptible. "No need." The leader of the group stood up, towering over them. "Yeah, no need, Sarah." The mockery in his voice when he used her name made several audience members wince. "Show's just getting started." He reached down and gripped James's shoulder, fingers digging into the worn leather jacket. Move over, old man. Me and my boys need more space. The push was deliberate, hard enough to force most men James's age to stumble. But James didn't move, not because he couldn't, but because he'd chosen not to. Decades of combat training had turned his balance into something immovable. For the first time, something flickered across the young man's face, a momentary confusion at the unexpected resistance. He pushed harder. James remained steady, his weathered hands resting calmly on his knees. I think, James finally said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded elite units, you should apologize to my wife. The young man blinked, genuine surprise crossing his face before hardening back into bravado. What did you say to me, old man? James stood slowly, a deliberate unfolding that revealed his true height. 6 feet of weathered discipline. He wasn't bulky or imposing in build, but something in his posture made the space around him seem suddenly smaller. I said, James repeated, each word measured and clear, apologize to my wife. The group exchanged glances, smirking at what they perceived as an old man's foolish courage. The leader stepped back, performing for his audience now. You hear that, guys? Grandpa wants me to apologize. He made an exaggerated bow toward Sarah. So sorry, ma'am, that your husband is about to get embarrassed. 2 of his friends moved to flank him, creating a half circle around James and Sarah. The theater had gone completely silent now, the film playing to no one's attention. Someone whispered, should we call security? James didn't shift his gaze from the leader. Last chance, son. Walk away now, and we all enjoy the rest of the film. Son. The young man's face flushed. I'm not your son. He jabbed a finger into James's chest. And you don't give me chances. James glanced at the finger, then back up. The small movement was controlled, precise. You're right. I'm not your father. His voice remained level. He would be ashamed of this behavior. The words landed like a physical blow. The young man's face contorted with rage. You don't know anything about me, you pathetic old. Marine Force Recon, 1976 to 2003. James interrupted quietly. Combat instructor at Quantico for 15 years after that. I've trained men who could disable you in ways your nightmares haven't imagined. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, but they wouldn't, because they learned respect alongside combat. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered across the young man's features. But surrounded by his friends, alcohol clouding his judgment, pride overruled caution. That's supposed to scare me? Some retirement home story. One of his friends laughed nervously. Dude, maybe we should just watch the movie. But the leader was committed now. He squared his shoulders, stepping deliberately into James's space. I don't care if you were Captain America. In this theater, right now, you're just a weak old man who can't protect his wife. He reached past James to flick Sarah's shoulder. See? What are you going to do about? The movement was so fluid, so economical, that most viewers miss exactly what happened. One moment, the young man's hand was extending towards Sarah. The next, his wrist was caught in James's grip, held just firmly enough to stop all movement. Don't touch my wife, James said softly. The young man tried to pull free, confusion replacing arrogance as his arm remained immobile in James's grip. Let go of me. His voice cracked slightly, the first hint of genuine alarm. James released him immediately, stepping back. Leave us be. That's all I'm asking. The leader stumbled backward, rubbing his wrist, face flushing with humiliation as he glanced at his friends. What had begun as entertainment was becoming something else, something that threatened his standing. Grab him, he ordered, pride overwhelming reason. 2 of his friends hesitated. The third, heavier set and wearing a dark hoodie, lunged forward with surprising speed. His fist aimed directly at James's face, a wild alcohol-fueled swing that would have connected with devastating force against most 68-year-old men. James wasn't most man. He shifted slightly, the punch missing by millimeters. In the same motion, his hand redirected the attacker's momentum, sending him stumbling into a row of seats with a crash that echoed through theater. A woman screamed. Someone shouted, "Call the police!" The leader, seeing his friend sprawled across empty seats, pulled something from his pocket. The metallic gleam of a switchblade catching the reflected light from the screen. "You're dead, old man." Sarah stood up. "James." "Stay seated, Sarah." James's voice remained calm, his focus absolute. His stance shifted subtly, weight centered, hands open at his sides. The knife wielder circled left, blade extended. James mirrored his movement, keeping Sarah behind him. The theater had emptied in their immediate vicinity, creating an impromptu arena illuminated by the flickering war scene on screen. "Last warning," James said. "Drop it." The young man lunged, blade slashing in a wide arc. James moved with precision of someone who had taught this scenario hundreds of times. His forearm deflected the attack, while his other hand gripped the assailant's elbow, applying precise pressure to the radial nerve. The knife clattered to the floor as the attacker's hand involuntarily opened, his knees buckling. James maintained the hold just long enough to guide him to the ground, then released him and stepped back. No one saw the fifth member of the group, the quiet one who had slipped around the far aisle. He charged from behind, swinging the heavy theater chair he'd wrenched free, catching James across the upper back. The impact was brutal. James stumbled forward, pain flaring across his shoulders. At 68, even with his training, the blow was jarring. He caught himself against a seat, a thin line of blood appearing at his temple from where he'd struck the armrest. The theater erupted in shouts. A teenage boy yelled, "That's not fair." The leader, seeing James momentarily stunned, reclaimed his knife from the floor. "Not so tough now, are you, Marine?" James straightened slowly, blinking once to clear the blood from his eye. He turned, facing all 5 men now, his breathing controlled despite the pain radiating through his back. "Is that all you've got?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air, not a taunt, but a genuine assessment from a man who had endured far worse in service to his country. Blood trickled down James's face, but his eyes remained clear and focused. The 5 young men had regrouped, forming a loose semicircle around him. The theater was silent except for the film's soundtrack. Ironically, the triumphant music that accompanied the Allied breakthrough at Normandy. 5 against 1, James observed calmly, and the one is bleeding. He wiped the blood from his eye with his sleeve. "You should probably leave while you can still walk out." The leader laughed, but it was hollow. Something in the old man's composure was unnerving. "You're the one who's going to need help walking, old-timer." He nodded to his friends, and they moved in together. What happened next would be described differently by various witnesses. Some would call it a dance, others a demonstration. The teenage boy recording on his phone would later title his viral video, "Real Life Captain America." James moved with the economy of motion that defines elite combat training. No wasted energy, no flashy techniques, just devastating efficiency. The first attacker found his momentum used against him. His charge redirected into the second man. Both crashed into seats. The third swung wildly. James simply wasn't where the punch landed. Instead, he was behind the man, applying brief pressure to specific points that caused the attacker's knees to buckle instantly. The fourth man connected with a glancing blow to James's shoulder, which earned him a precisely delivered strike to the solar plexus that left him gasping on the floor, fight completely gone. The leader, knife still in hand, hesitated then lunged in desperation. James sidestepped, caught the extended arm, and with a single fluid motion disarmed him and pinned him face down across the seat, arm hyperextended behind him. "Drop it," James ordered. The knife clattered to the carpet. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 20 seconds. James maintained the hold, his breathing barely elevated. "Do you understand me now?" he asked, voice still conversational. The young man nodded frantically, fight replaced by fear. "When I release you, you and your friend will leave. You won't return." James applied the slightest additional pressure. "Are we clear?" "Yes." The word came out as a pained gasp. "Yes, sir." The sir wasn't mocking anymore. James released his hold and stepped back, maintaining his guard position until the young man scrambled to his feet. The theater remained frozen, in stunned silence. The leader helped 2 of his friends up, while the others staggered to their feet unaided. No more words were exchanged, none were needed. They hurried up the aisle, not looking back. All bravado evaporated. As they reached the exit, theater security finally arrived. Two young guards who looked uncertainly between the departing group and James. They were just leaving, James explained calmly, retrieving a handkerchief from his pocket to dab at his temple. A spontaneous applause broke out, starting with a young couple in the back and spreading until the entire theater was clapping. James nodded once in acknowledgement, then returned to his seat beside Sarah. "Are you all right?" he asked, taking her hand. "I should be asking you that," she replied, gently touching the cut on his forehead. The theater manager approached nervously. "Sir, I'm so sorry. We've called the police and an ambulance." "No need," James said. "Just a scratch." A young man approached from several rows back, wearing a faded army t-shirt. He stood at attention. "Force Recon, sir. I was 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines myself. Not as prestigious, but..." James extended his hand. "All Marines are family, son." The younger veteran's face lit up as they shook hands. "Would have helped if I'd known, sir. By the time I realized what was happening, you had it handled." James smiled slightly. "Some fights you never forget how to fight." The manager cleared his throat. "Sir, ma'am, if you'd like, we have premium seats reserved. And of course, tonight's showing is complimentary." The remainder of the film played without interruption, though few eyes remained on the screen. When the credits rolled and the lights came up, James and Sarah made their way toward the exit, receiving nods of respect from fellow moviegoers. 3 months later, the Century Theater installed a small plaque in their lobby. "Respect all patrons, especially those who served." The manager implemented a strict code of conduct policy, which he credited to a lesson learned from a Marine. "The strength I showed that night wasn't physical," James later told a local veterans group. "It was discipline, knowing when to act and when to wait. That's what military training really teaches you." The security cameras had captured everything. When the footage circulated online, it sparked a nationwide conversation about respecting veterans and the elderly. Comments flooded in from current and former service members, sharing similar experiences. "People see age as weakness," James reflected. "But there's a reason ancient cultures revered their elders. Experience can't be downloaded or rushed. It must be earned through time and trials." Sarah squeezed his hand as he finished speaking. "Some battles," she added softly, "aren't fought on battlefields, but in movie theaters and grocery stores. And they matter just as much." Have you ever witnessed someone being judged based on their age or appearance, only to be surprised by who they really were? Share your story in the comments. If you believe those who serve deserve our respect, help spread this message by subscribing and sharing this video. Remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room has the most extraordinary story.